The silence at table 4 was louder than the clatter of silverware and the hum of conversation filling the upscale Italian restaurant, a heavy, suffocating silence that seemed to suck the air right out of Lucas's lungs as he looked across the candlelit expanse at the woman he had hoped might be different. Tiffany sat back in the plush leather chair, her manicured fingers drumming impatiently on the pristine white tablecloth, her eyes scanning Lucas's attire with a mixture of pity and undisguised disdain that felt like a physical blow to his chest. She looked at his hands, which were rough and calloused from years of hard labor, and then at his suit, which was clean but undeniably dated, a relic from a time before his life had become a whirlwind of single parenthood and sleepless nights. She didn't lower her voice when she spoke, seemingly unconcerned with who might overhear the verdict she was passing on. A man she had known for less than an hour, her words slicing through the ambient jazz music like a serrated knife. "Look, Lucas, you seem like a nice guy. Really, you do," she began, tilting her head with a patronizing smile that didn't reach her cold eyes. "But let's be realistic here. I need security. I need a man who can provide a certain lifestyle, and frankly, looking at you, well, you're just too poor for me." The words hung in the air, ugly and sharp, stripping away his dignity in front of the surrounding diners who pretended not to listen, leaving Lucas sitting there with his heart hammering against his ribs, not because he was ashamed of who he was, but because, once again, he had been judged solely on the cover of a book that was far more complex than anyone cared to read. If you believe that a person's worth is measured by the kindness in their heart and not the balance in their bank account, and if you support single parents doing their best against the odds, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share this story to spread the message of humility and second chances. Lucas held her gaze, fighting the urge to look down at his scuffed shoes, the shoes he had forgotten to polish because his 6-year-old daughter, Lily, had a fever the night before, and he had spent the entire evening holding a cool washcloth to her forehead. He wanted to tell Tiffany about that. He wanted to explain that the reason he was 5 minutes late was that he had to wait for the babysitter to settle in, and the reason his hands were rough was that he believed in doing the work himself even when he didn't have to. But as he looked at the dismissal in her eyes, he realized that none of it mattered to her. She had already calculated his value based on his fraying cuffs and lack of a luxury watch, and the sum had come up wanting. It was a painful reminder of the world he lived in, a world where he was constantly underestimated, a world that saw a single father in modest clothes and assumed failure rather than sacrifice. He took a sip of water, the ice clinking softly, and felt a familiar ache of loneliness, the kind that didn't come from being alone, but from being unseen. He had built a life from the ashes of tragedy after his wife passed away 3 years ago, working 18-hour days to ensure Lily would never know want, yet here he was, being reduced to a tax bracket by a stranger who didn't know the first thing about the mountains he had climbed. The dinner had started awkwardly and had only spiraled downward from there, with Tiffany ordering the most expensive bottle of wine on the menu without asking him, testing boundaries he hadn't even set yet. She spoke at length about her summer in the Hamptons and her need for a partner who could keep up. All while Lucas nodded politely, his mind drifting to the business meetings he had postponed to be here tonight. He had agreed to this date because his sister had begged him to get back out there to try and find a connection, insisting that not everyone was superficial, but it seemed fate had a cruel sense of humor. Tiffany asked him what he did for a living, and when he answered honestly that he worked in the food industry, her nose had crinkled as if he had said he scrubbed dumpsters. She didn't ask if he enjoyed it, or what his role was. She simply assumed he was a line cook or a struggling waiter, filling in the blanks with her own prejudices. She didn't see the man who stayed up until 3 a.m. balancing ledgers, the man who knew the name of every employee in his organization, the man who had turned a single, crumbling diner into a culinary empire through sheer grit and determination. She only saw the lack of a designer label on his jacket. As the main course arrived, the tension at the table became palpable, with the delicious aroma of truffle risotto doing little to mask the bitter taste of rejection in Lucas's mouth. Tiffany picked at her food, clearly eager for the night to end so she could move on to a prospect she deemed more suitable, someone who looked the part she was casting for her life. She pulled out her phone, texting openly while he ate in silence, a display of disrespect that stung more than her words. Lucas thought about Lily waiting at home, her innocent belief that her daddy was a superhero, and he wondered if he was failing her by trying to bring someone like Tiffany into their lives. Maybe he was supposed to be alone. Maybe the baggage of a widower with a child and a relentless work ethic was too heavy for anyone else to carry. He felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to just pay the bill and leave, to retreat to the sanctuary of his home where love was unconditional and nobody cared about the brand of his shoes. But he stayed, his innate politeness keeping him rooted to the chair, forcing him to endure the final, agonizing minutes of a date that had ended before it truly began. Lethen. The atmosphere in the restaurant shifted subtly as the heavy oak doors of the kitchen swung open and the chaotic energy of a dinner rush spilled out for a brief second. A tall, impeccably dressed man in a sharp suit walked briskly onto the floor, his eyes scanning the tables with the intensity of a hawk. It was Marcus, the general manager of this specific location, a man known for his terrifying standards and absolute intolerance for mediocrity. Tiffany noticed him immediately, her posture straightening, as she whispered to Lucas that the manager looked like someone important, implying the stark contrast between him and her dad. Marcus was moving with purpose, heading straight toward their section, his face etched with a look of serious concern that usually signaled a very important client was unhappy, or a health inspector had just walked in. Tiffany watched him approach, a flirtatious smile playing on her lips, perhaps hoping to catch the eye of a man she deemed worthy of her attention, completely ignoring the poor single dad sitting across from her. As Marcus reached their table, Tiffany prepared to speak, perhaps to complain about the service or simply to insert herself into the orbit of a man in a power suit. But Marcus didn't even glance at her. He stopped directly beside Lucas's chair, his demeanor shifting from authoritative to deeply respectful, a transformation that froze the words in Tiffany's throat. The restaurant was buzzing, but to Lucas, the world seemed to slow down as he looked up at his employee, seeing the panic in Marcus's eyes that he was trying desperately to hide from the other patrons. Marcus leaned in, ignoring the social protocol of interrupting a date, and spoke in a voice that was clear, urgent, and loud enough to carry over the low hum of conversation. "I am so sorry to interrupt your dinner, boss." Marcus said the word boss, landing with the weight of a sledgehammer in the center of the table. "But we have a crisis in the kitchen with the main gas line, and the executive chef says he won't make a decision without your direct approval. We need you." Well, the silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum where Tiffany's entire worldview collapsed in on itself in a single, devastating instant. She stared at Lucas, her mouth slightly open, her eyes darting from his calm, weary face to the deferential posture of the manager who had just addressed him as the owner of the establishment. The cognitive dissonance was almost visible as she tried to reconcile the poor single dad in the dated suit with the man being called boss in one of the city's most exclusive restaurants. Lucas sighed, the wariness of the deception lifting from his shoulders, and he placed his napkin on the table with a deliberate, slow movement that commanded more respect than any shouted order. He looked at Marcus, his expression shifting into the focused, steely resolve of a captain taking the helm of his ship. "Is the backup generator running?" Lucas asked, his voice changing, losing the hesitancy of the date, and taking on the rich timbre of authority. "Yes, sir," Marcus replied instantly. "Then shut the main valve and switch to the induction units for the searing. I'll be back there in 2 minutes to oversee the repair team." Lucas turned his gaze back to Tiffany, who looked as though she had been struck by lightning, her face draining of color as the realization of her colossal mistake washed over her in a cold, humiliating wave. The food service job, the rough hands, the tired eyes, it all clicked into place, not as signs of poverty, but as the badges of a man who built his kingdom with his own 2 hands, who laid the bricks in, scrubbed the floors, and cooked the meals until he owned the block. She stammered, trying to find words to backpedal, to undo the insults she had hurled just moments ago. But her voice failed her. You own this place," she whispered, the arrogance completely evaporated, replaced by a hollow, desperate shock. Lucas stood up, buttoning his jacket, standing tall in a way that made him seem inches taller than he had. Sitting down, he didn't look angry, he just looked disappointed, a deep, profound disappointment that cut deeper than anger ever could. "I own this place, Tiffany," Lucas said quietly, his voice devoid of malice but firm as iron, and the one across town, and the supply chain that delivers the ingredients. He looked down at her, seeing not a villain, but a tragedy of shallow values. I didn't dress up tonight because I spent the afternoon fixing a broken oven at the shelter downtown. And then I was taking care of my daughter. I'm looking for a partner who wants to build a life, not someone who just wants to consume the one I've already made. He pulled a sleek, black credit card from his wallet, the kind that invites no questions, and handed it to Marcus. Marcus, take care of the lady's dinner, whatever she wants. Treat her with the respect she didn't think I deserved. He looked at Tiffany one last time, his eyes sad but resolute. I am too poor for you, Tiffany, not in money but in judgment. I can't afford to be with someone who values a suit more than a soul. Live with that. Lucas turned and walked away from the table, not looking back, following Marcus toward the kitchen doors. As he walked through the dining room, he could feel eyes on him, but this time, the whispers were different. He wasn't the downtrodden man being dumped. He was the king returning to his castle. He walked into the kitchen, the heat and the noise embracing him like an old friend, the chaotic symphony of pots and pans soothing the ache in his chest. His staff looked up as he entered, faces lighting up with relief and respect, choruses of evening, boss, and hey, Lucas ringing out. Here, he wasn't judged by his shoes. He was judged by his leadership, his loyalty, and his ability to keep the ship afloat in a storm. He rolled up his sleeves, revealing those calloused hands, and got to work, standing shoulder to shoulder with his team, solving the problem, leading from the front. Later that night, as the adrenaline of the crisis faded and the restaurant closed its doors, Lucas drove home in his reliable, older model truck, leaving the luxury cars of his patrons behind in the lot. He let himself into the quiet house, the silence here different, peaceful, warm, full of love. He walked into Lily's room, the soft glow of the nightlight illuminating her sleeping face, her messy hair fanned out on the pillow. He sat on the edge of the bed, his heart swelling so much it felt like it might burst. This was his wealth. This was his empire. He realized that Tiffany had done him a favor. She had reminded him that he didn't need someone to complete his picture. He just needed someone who could appreciate the art. He kissed Lily's forehead, promising her in the silence that he would never settle for less than real love, for a love that saw the gold beneath the dust. If this story touched your heart and reminded you that true value lies within, please comment true wealth below to show your support for Lucas and fathers everywhere. Lucas knew the road ahead would still be lonely at times, and the search for a partner who understood him would be long. But as he sat there in the dark, holding his daughter's small hand, he felt richer than any billionaire on the planet. He had his dignity, he had his daughter, and he had the unshakable knowledge that he was the boss of his own destiny. He wasn't too poor for love. He was just saving his richness for someone who could truly afford the price of admission, a kind and open heart. And as he finally closed his eyes to sleep, Lucas smiled, knowing that the next time someone judged him by his cover, he wouldn't hurt. He would just feel pity for everything they were missing out on. If this story brought a tear to your eye or a smile to your face, please don't forget to like, share, and leave a comment sharing your own experiences with judgment. Your interaction helps us share more stories of hope and humanity.